In popular culture, cats are often associated with ancient Egypt, and for good reason. We found Egyptian paintings from ages ago that show cats wearing collars and leashes, and even cats eating from bowls and hanging around people. These paintings are the oldest unmistakable depictions that we have of fully domesticated cats. But domestication isn't something that happens all at once. It's a fluid process that can stop and start and sometimes even take thousands of years, as it did in the case of cats. So even though we know that the ancient Egyptians kept cats as pets, we also know that the domestication of cats didn't start with them. The relationship between humans and cats actually goes back thousands of years earlier to a different place. The oldest archaeological evidence that we found of humans having an intentional relationship with cats comes from the Mediterranean island of Cyprus, where archaeologists found an 8-month-old kitten buried in its own tiny grave, only 16 inches away from a human grave. Researchers studying the site concluded that the kitten's grave was deliberately dug out, and that the kitten was intentionally laid to rest there over 9,000 years ago. We don't know if this buried kitten was a pet exactly, but at the very least, this joint burial implies that some kind of special, meaningful relationship has existed between humans and cats for over 9,000 years, dating back to way before those Egyptian paintings. Another aspect of this burial that's really interesting is that cats aren't native to the island of Cyprus, but they are native to the nearby Levantine coast. So it's likely that humans developed relationships with cats somewhere in the Levant and then transported them to Cyprus by boat. A genetic analysis published in 2007 also lends credence to that theory. In this study, researchers collected DNA samples from 979 cats to figure out which species of wildcat gave rise to the domestic cat. After analyzing the collected samples, researchers saw that all domestic cats around the world are genetically descended from a single Middle Eastern subspecies of wildcat that's still around today, called Fs libica. I think learning about this specifically was so cool because as a kid, I always assumed that the ancestors of house cats were big cats like lions and tigers and jaguars. But no, apparently those ancestors are tiny, just like our pets, and they're fully wild and dangerous and adorable. The results of this genetic analysis, combined with the archaeological evidence at the burial site, suggest that cat domestication very likely arose in the Middle East somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000 years ago, specifically somewhere around the Fertile Crescent. With the place and time pinned down for the origins of cat domestication, let's take a look at how and why humans and cats ever started interacting. Cats don't really take instruction well, and they're just not all that useful to humans from a productivity standpoint. So it's really unlikely that humans intentionally sought out cats to try to domesticate them. Instead, all the evidence points to cats initiating their own domestication by slowly making their way into human society because of a few environmental advantages that they discovered for themselves. Around the time of the first permanent human settlements, over 9,000 years ago, humans produced lots and lots of trash, just like they do today. And that trash, especially when it was on the outskirts of towns and villages, attracted local wildcats and provided them with an easy-to-get-to, unguarded source of food. To feed their new, fast-growing permanent settlements, ancient humans were also storing and collecting large amounts of grain. These grain stores attracted tons of mice, creating another food source for local wildcats that were adventurous enough to go find it. Over time, the wildcats that were willing to risk hanging around humans thrived, because they gained access to a plentiful food source that just didn't exist in the wild. And so that group of wildcats had a really easy time reproducing, and they propagated the behavioral traits that made them fond of humans. At its core, that's how cat domestication started and how it worked for a really long time. Cats that were comfortable hanging around people had an easier time surviving, and so they had lots of kittens that, from birth, were raised around people. But like we mentioned before, domestication is a fluid process. It stops and starts and doesn't always progress linearly. So even though today we keep cats as pets just like we do with dogs, some scientists wonder if cats are truly fully domesticated because they differ from dogs and other domesticated animals in a few really interesting ways. Even as ancient wildcats were developing relationships with humans, they often still lived outside in the wilderness on their own, which meant that they had to keep their hunting skills sharp to find food and to protect themselves. If you interact with your average house cat today, the presence of those hunting instincts is usually pretty quickly apparent in a way that isn't really the case with any other domesticated animal. And because cats lived outside on their own for so much of their history, and often still do, humans never exerted control over the breeding of cats like they did with dogs and with so many other domesticated animals, which meant that cats that were in the process of being domesticated regularly bred with wildcat populations that just didn't love interacting with humans, making it so that domestic cats today retain what biologists call the body plan of their wild ancestors, meaning that domestic cats today just don't look all that different from the wild cats that came before them. On the other hand, dogs and other domesticated animals are so drastically different from their wild ancestors because humans exerted control over their breeding for thousands of years. This is my wonderful cat. Her name is Fatouche. We named her after a salad that's popular in the Arab world. And even though she's cute and cuddly most of the time, at other points she gets into this hunting mode and chases me around the house in a way that has me thinking, this is an entire wild animal living with me in my house. But I love her, and I'm grateful to have her in my life. Doing the research for this video and learning about all of the history that makes up our relationship was fun because while I was reading articles, I could glance up from my laptop and look over to her and think, you know what, I get it. I get why you are the way that you are now, and I forgive you. But anyways, whether it's the animals that have allowed us to build and sustain human communities throughout history, or the ones that we've welcomed into our homes as family, animals have played such a crucial role in the human story. And I hope to keep learning about the science and the history behind that. My name is Ryan. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.